Hi, and welcome back to our series Backgammon Basics here on DragTheBar. I'm Bill Roberti, and I'm your instructor for the series. Now, last time in episode 5, we looked at how to play some replies to the opening roll. This episode, we're going to look at another typical game plan, which is called the holding game. This is really essential stuff because holding games are by far the most common type of games that you'll see as you play backgammon, and we need to be very familiar with how they should be played. So, holding game. What does that mean exactly? Who's holding what? Now, a holding game refers to a situation where one side has built a good advanced anchor, while the other side has escaped his back checkers and taken a lead in the race. On our screen right now, we're looking at a pretty typical holding game position. White is holding onto black's 5-point, while black has escaped all his back checkers, and he's now trying to get home safely. Right now, black's ahead by 20 pips in the race. His pip count is 114, white's is 134. So he's a definite favorite to win. He's actually about 70% to win overall. But white could turn the game around if he either gets a shot and hits it or throws some big numbers to catch up in the race. Black's job is to get home without leaving a shot. White's job is to hold on to the 5-point and the midpoint while he builds up his home board and he waits for black to leave a shot later which he can hit. Now, another variation on the whole holding game theme is what's called a mutual holding game. And here's a typical example of that. Now, in this position, each side has a defensive anchor. White has an anchor on black's 5-point. Black over here has an anchor on white's 4-point. In effect, each side is holding the other. Both sides will try to avoid leaving a shot while they build up their home board. Whoever throws a double that lets them move their back men will become a solid favorite, and the game then transposes into a simple holding game. Now, in this game that we're about to look at, we'll see a game progress from a mutual holding game like this to a straight holding game like the first position that we saw, and then finally to a series of other positions as the game takes some twists and turns. Okay, let's get started. Black wins the opening roll with a 6-2, and he plays it the way that that's our favorite way to play the roll. We've explained this in the episode on playing the opening roll. He uses the 6 to go from 24 to 18, and he uses the 2 to go from 13-11. And we explain that that's a nice balanced play. Black is trying to get an advanced anchor over here on the 18-point. And meanwhile, the blot that he leaves on the 11 is pretty safe, and it's going to help him build some points later on. Okay, now white comes back with a nice roll of 2-1. So the first thing he does is put an end temporarily to black's plans to get a checker, to get a point on the 18-point. He hits with the 1, and then he has a 2 to play. And he's got a couple of different ways he can play the 2. He can split his back men like that, or he can bring down a builder like that. Now, which of those two plays you make really depends on this number, how big that number is. If white had hit with a number like 1-3 or a 1-4, he would probably choose to split his back men because that 3 or that 4 gives him a chance to make a good anchor. But the 2, that's not really a point that you're dying to make. It's not a terrific anchor early in the game. So instead, white's a little better off using this roll as a building play, putting a builder in a good position just the way black did over here on his last turn, and sort of backing up the attack that he's trying to get started now. So good roll for white and a good way to play it. Now on his turn, black rolls a 5-3. Of course, he has to come in from the bar first of all. He could consider coming in with the 5, but notice if he does that, this checker is under attack from a lot of different white checkers, and black really doesn't want white to be able to point on him on a point that's as valuable as white's own 5-point. So instead, he uses the 3 to enter. He's entering on a point that white's less eager to make because it's deeper in the board. And with the 5, he just plays a checker down from the 13 to the 8. Notice he didn't have any good 5s to play over on this side. It's a modest play, but it's the best that black could do with that roll right now. And now white comes back on his turn with a great shot, double aces. And it's really hard to play this roll badly, but white, in fact, makes the best play with it. He takes 2 checkers from his 6-point to his 5-point, making the very valuable 5-point. And then he takes, in order to deal with this blot here, he takes 2 checkers from the 17, from the white's 8-point to white's 7-point, and makes 3 points in a row, leaves no direct shots. So that's an excellent way of playing the roll, and notice he's made 2 really valuable points, the 5-point and the 7-point. Now, black in his turn comes back with a very good shot, a 6-1. He's got a couple of ways to play this. One way to play it is to make the bar point, like that, using a checker from the 13 and a checker from the 8. And the other way to play it is to make the 5-point, using a checker from the 11 and a checker from the 6. And what black actually does is to make the 5-point, which is better for a couple of reasons. First of all, the 5 is an inner point, so it's a little better. It's a little more important than the 7-point. And secondly, by playing this way, black keeps a spare checkers on the 6, spare checkers on the 8, and he keeps a spare checker on the 13. And spares are very good because spares help you make new points without having to give up old points. Notice that if black had played the roll the other way, if he'd made the 7-point, he now has no spare on the 13-point. We call that being stripped on a point when you're down to the last 2 checkers there. So if in the future he wanted to use a checker from the 13 to make a good point somewhere, he'd have to break the 13 in order to do it. By playing the way he chose to, making the 5 instead, he keeps spares everywhere, which is just generally a good positional idea. Now it's white's turn, and white throws a really good number, a 5-3. And if you look around for a second, I think you can see there's just one really good way to play this. He takes a checker from his midpoint and a checker from his 14-point, and he moves them both to the 8-point, to white's 8-point, and builds a good point and builds a blocking point. So he's starting to build a prime here. He's starting to keep black trapped. Now, black shoots a 2-1, and that's a good roll for him. He really likes seeing that. First of all, he's going to use the 2 to make this anchor in back. Now, we've already seen that an anchor on the 22-point, white's 3-point in this case, it's not the greatest place for an anchor, but if you're being crushed, it's good enough. This way, black stops any ideas white might have of attacking his rear checkers. He anchors them up. They're nice and safe now, and although he's still pretty much blocked in, at least he doesn't have to worry about being attacked and closed out. And then with the ace, he makes the obvious play. He puts a checker from the 6 to the 5, which is safe, and it gives him a few more rolls to make points in here. Okay, now white throws a 4-2. There's a couple of things he could do with that, but there's only one really good thing he can do. Let's take a look at some of the possibilities. He could make his own 4-point, for instance, by moving a checker from the 6 and a checker from the 8. That makes a good point, but it leaves a shot. Black can hit him with a 5. So that's not a play he wants to make if he has a good alternative. He could also play a 4-2 from his midpoint down to his 7-point, like that. That's okay. If he has nothing better, it's perfectly safe. But in fact, he does have a better play. He can take a checker from the 1-point, from black's 1-point, and move it first 2 and then 4, putting it on black's bar point. Now, this is a good play, although it takes some risk. There's certainly some chance that black can hit this, but this gets the process of moving his back men started. And at this stage in the game, white has built a good prime. He now has to start to deal with the fact that his back men had not moved yet, and it's really time to get them up and try to make an anchor. So this is a good move for him. He begins the fight for black's 7 point, and it was time to do that. Now black shoots. He rolls a 5-3. Not exactly what he wanted to see. He was hoping to roll either a 6, which would hit from the 13 point, or a 1, which would hit from the 8 point. He didn't roll either of those. 5-3, though, it's not a terrible number. It doesn't move the back men, but what it does do is just make another inner board point. And there's nothing better to do than that. It's a good point to have. So black's sorry he couldn't hit on the bar, but this is a good consolation prize. And now white shoots, and he's hoping to roll a 6 so he can get out here and make the bar point, and in fact that's exactly what he does. So he takes his back checker, first moves it 1, then moves it 5, and makes an anchor here on the bar point. And notice now that we have reached a mutual holding game. White has an anchor here on the bar point. Black has an anchor here on the 22 point. Both sides have made anchors. And now with that in place, the sides will now have to maneuver around these positions. If black is able to roll a double 6, he's going to get here to the outfield and take the lead in the game. If white is able to roll some sort of double, he'll move his back men around, and then it'll be only black who's playing a holding game. So right now we're in a mutual holding game. The dice will determine where exactly we go from here. Right now, whoever rolls a big double or hits a shot is going to be the one to take the real advantage. For the moment, the game's pretty evenly balanced. Okay, now black in turn shoots and he rolls a 6-4. And here we're going to see the first actually somewhat serious mistake of the game. What black elects to do is sort of the obvious play. He takes a checker from the midpoint, he moves it 4, and then he moves it 6 more, and it ends up on the 3. Perfectly safe play. At first glance, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it, but the problem here now is that going forward, it's a lot easier for white to play his moves than it is for black. Notice that black is now stripped on the midpoint, so he can't really move checkers from there without leaving a bunch of shots. And he really has only one spare left to play, and that's the spare on the 8 point. And after he plays that spare, he may have to start giving up key points. That's a sign in a holding game that maybe you've played a little too cautiously. When you're seeing the situation come up where you're not going to be able to make moves easily. Now, what black should have done is a play that looks very bold, very dangerous, but it's the right idea here. He should use the 6 to jump into the outfield with his back men, and then use the 4 to start the 4 point. And the reason this is good is it precipitates a crisis when black's home board is actually stronger than white's. Right now, black has 3 points in his home board, white has only 2. That means if the players start hitting each other loose, the edge usually goes to the player who's got the better home board, and in this case that's black. Now this play certainly has some danger. White can hit this checker with a 4. He can hit the checker inside with 4s and 3s, maybe 5s. But notice that 4s come up in both cases. White needs a 4 to hit here. He also would like to hit here with a 4. So we call that duplication. To some extent, that means that white's good rolls are somewhat minimized. Anyway, this is a very bold play. It's a play most players would probably miss. It looks kind of dangerous, but it fits into the flow of the game a little better than the safe play that black chose. So that was the way he should have gone. And what in fact he elected to do was the very safe play, which may get him in trouble later on. It depends really on the dice. Okay, now it's white's turn. He rolls a modest number, a 2-1, and he elects to make really the only good play that he's got. He takes a checker from the midpoint and moves it 3 pips, puts it here on black's 15 point, which of course is white's 10 point. Nothing wrong with that. It's only the checker's only exposed to being hit from a 6-1, so very little danger here, and the checker itself becomes a builder for white's 4 point. Now black shoots and he rolls a 4-1, and that's actually one of his best shots. There's one very good way to play it, and there really aren't any other choices here. He takes a checker from the 8, moves it 4 pips down to the 4, and then a checker from the 5, moves that 1 pip, makes a very nice board, which could be useful if we start getting some hitting later on. Now white shoots. White really wanted to roll something like a 6-2, a 6-3, maybe a 3-2, all of which would make the 4 point. Instead he rolls 6-5, not a bad number by any means. And again, his play here is pretty forced. He takes the 2 checkers from the 12 point. He moves the first one 6 down to the bar point, and he moves the second one 5 down to his 8 point. So although he had to give up his midpoint, he's still got a lot of builders to either make the 4 point or attack black if black chooses to run out. And what we're seeing here is the basic contours of what we call the mutual holding game. Both sides holding on to their anchors, both sides maneuvering around, trying to build inner points while they wait for something decisive to happen. So far it hasn't happened yet, but chances are it will pretty soon. Now black rolls a 2-1. Not a great shot. He's not going to move his backmen and break his anchor. He's not going to move off the midpoint and leave some shots. He's got to do something over here. He wants to keep the 8 point. He doesn't want to leave a shot there. So the play he elects is the right play. He moves a checker from 4-2 and a checker from 3-2, basically rearranging his home board. Instead of the 4 point, he now has the 2 point. But he's got the 4 point slotted, so maybe he can make it next turn. And now white rolls the same number, a 2-1. Again, there's not an awful lot he can do with it. Instead, he just rearranges his builders here. He moves a checker from the 7 point to the 5 point, and a checker from the 7 point to the 6 point. Keeping 4 builders, notice, in range of his 4 point. He can make that point next turn with any combination that includes a 6, a 4, a 2, or a 1. So that's going to be quite a few numbers to make that point. Now it's black's turn, and he shoots and fires a perfecta, a 6-1. Basically his best shot, the only number that manages to come out with a 6 and hit this blot. So he does in fact hop out, put white's blot on the bar, and now we've got a new favorite in the game. Black is doing great, and white's job is to come in, and for that he needs either a 4 or a 1. And white rolls. Unfortunately, he rolls a 6-5, and of course with the 6 point occupied, the 5 point occupied, white can't come in. He's stuck on the bar. And now black assesses the situation. He realizes now he's got a big lead in the race, and he's also got an awful lot of numbers that cover this blot on the 4 point and give him a terrific board. So he elects to turn the cube to 2 and give it to white. He's doubling, and now it's white who has to decide whether to take or to drop. Now, in this situation, what white needs to do is take a look and see just how often does black actually cover the blot on the 4 point. He can cover with 4s from the 8 point, and out of the 36 possible numbers he can roll next turn, there's 11 that contain a direct 4. There's also 3-1 and double 2s, which bring the total up to 14. And in addition, he's got a couple of long distance covers. He can cover from 13 point if he rolls a 3 and a 6, and he can cover from the 15 point if he rolls a 6 and a 5. So all told, almost exactly half his numbers will cover the blot on the 4 point, which is pretty good, and that's why he decides to double. He might be able to cover the blot on the 4, and even if he doesn't cover it, there's no guarantee that white will hit it if he leaves it there. Now, from white's point of view, he's losing, but he's still in the game. Remember that if gammons aren't an issue, you only need to win 1 game out of 4 in order to take a double. And white looks at the situation here. He realizes that half the time black won't cover this blot, and certainly white's going to have some reasonable chances in those games. And even if black does cover, there's still some chance that white can come in and eventually get a shot that could win the game. So all in all, white decides, and I think correctly, that a take here is worthwhile. He's going to win more than the 1 game in 4 that he needs in order to pull this out. So white, in fact, elects to take. And now black shoots, and he rolls one of his good numbers. He rolls a 4-2. The 4 is obvious. He's just going to cover the blot with the 4. Now he's got a deuce to play. And now he makes a sort of a curious mistake. The obvious and good play with the deuce is to just play 8-6, which does a couple of things. First of all, it brings the checker within range of the 1 point, so that after a while, when white eventually enters, black has a number that can hit that blot. The other thing it does is it picks up the blot so that white can't roll double 1s and then enter and then hit out here, which would be a really good shot for him. There's no need to allow that. It's unlikely, but taking it away is basically free. You can take it away and it won't cost you anything. Instead, black elects to make a sort of pointless move. He safeguards this blot, and that one wasn't really in any danger at all. So a good roll, but black has misplayed it. He's made a small but noticeable mistake here. And as sometimes happens in backgammon, black's mistake is brutally punished. White rolls his best number, double 1s, so he enters with 1 ace, and then with the next ace, the next 2 aces, he moves those 2 checkers, hits this blot, and finally with the 4th ace, he just goes from his 8 point to his 7 point. Not quite enough to turn the game around. Black's still in good shape, but white has really come back to just about even, and he's very, very happy now that he took the double. And now black shoots, and he comes back with a fine number, basically. He was a big favorite to come in, but he comes in with an especially good number, 2-1, which just allows him to enter on the 1 point, come up here, and remake his anchor. So he's back in the game. He doesn't have to worry about being attacked, but now the game has taken on a new phase. We're actually sort of back in another mutual holding game. Black has an anchor here, white has an anchor here, and now again the players have to maneuver around the anchors. And now white shoots and gets a really good shot, a 2-1. Certainly a very good number, and what he does is the obvious play. He moves a 2 from his 6 point, the 1 from his 5 point, so he fills in the 4 point and gets himself a 5 point prime. So now he's right back in the game. He's got 2 of black's checkers behind this 5 prime. There's only 1 of his checkers that's trapped behind a 5 prime. So the game is up in the air now. White's doing very well. And in fact, black now shoots his best. We're seeing a lot of really good numbers being rolled here. Although black's behind a 5 prime, he rolls double 6s, which is the only number that will get him out. So now he has to decide the best way to play it, because he does have some options. He could, I mean, here's a play that he could make. He's not going to. He could actually use the roll to make his 1 point from his midpoint and close white out. The trouble with that play is that he then has to roll another 6 very quickly to get these checkers out before he uses up all the timing represented by this checker and then has to break his board. He doesn't want to do that. He realizes that when you're trapped behind a 5 prime and you roll double 6s, you really need to use it to get your men out. So the first 2 6s are pretty clear. He takes the 2 checkers on the 22 point and he moves them out to the 16 point. Then he's got some choices. Now, one way to play it, for example, is to keep these checkers going from the 16 all the way around to the 10. That's a good play. It leaves black way ahead in the race, actually up about 30 pips or more. But he sees that he has a chance to do something even better. So what he does with his last two sixes is he takes two checkers from his 13 point, moves them down to his 7. Now white is trapped behind a full 6 prime. There's no way that white can get out. And somehow white has to now manage to get a black checker behind his own prime and hope that he can win the battle of the primes. Now, of course, he has a chance right here because if he rolls a 5 next turn, he'll hit this blot, send it back here somewhere, and then black will have to extricate that yet again. But if white misses the 5, black is really in very good shape. So this is an excellent play by black. It's really turned the game, or he's really turned the game around yet again, and now he's back in control. And white on his turn is going to have to try to roll a 5. Okay, white shoots. He's looking for a 5, but unfortunately he doesn't get it. He rolls double 2s. So he's got to figure out the best way to play this, and he comes up with a pretty good play. He moves 2 of the checkers from the 8 point to the 10 point, and then he moves 1 checker from the 7 to the 3. Now, moving from the 7 to the 3, that's a pretty easy play. What we call this slotting the front of the prime. What he's doing by putting a checker there is that he hopes next turn he'll cover it with either a 5 or a 3 and extend his prime 1 point more. Meanwhile, as he moves up and holds the 10 point, notice that that's restraining the black checkers, which are 6 pips away. At some point pretty soon, black is going to have to move off this point, and then white's going to hope to get a shot, hit it, and send that black checker back here and keep it trapped, maybe force black to break up his front position. So we'll see how it's a good play. We'll see how this works out. Okay, now black in his turn rolls a 6-5. Not really one of his better numbers. Ideally, he'd like to have rolled something like 4-4, which would enable him to move these checkers over to the 12 point and then pick up this blot and get it to safety there. He can play safe, and that's what he does. He takes the checker on the 13 point, he moves it 6, then he moves it 5 more. So he's safe, but he's used up all the time represented by this checker. That checker really doesn't have very many places to go now. And it looks like what's going to happen is that white is going to build up his board a little more and keep his prime. And next turn, it looks like black will either break this point and leave a shot, or maybe break his 7 point and leave a shot. Either way, the game's not locked up yet by any means. White can still pull this out. Okay, now white rolls. He rolls a pretty good number, a 5-2. That's really just what he was looking for. The 5, he's going to cover the blot on the 3 point from his 8 point by moving that checker 5 pips. And the 2, he's got a couple of choices. He decides to make the most flexible play just by shifting the spare on his 6 point down to the 4 point with his 2. And that way he still has several checkers bearing on the next point that he wants to make, which is his 2 point. And now it's going to be up to black to try to find a roll that plays well next turn. And he's probably going to have to concede something. He's either going to have to leave a blot out here, or he's going to have to break the 7 point and leave a blot. And now black shoots, and he rolls a pretty interesting number, a 6-4, which gives him a couple of different ways to play it. So let's look at the two choices that he has. The most obvious play is to just run a checker from the 16 point. And the way he'd do that is to move it 4 and then keep it going, move it 6 more. He leaves this blot out here, which white can hit with a 6. And if white hits it, the checker goes back here. It then has to get out from behind white's prime. That's a game that could go any which way. The other play, which is less obvious, is to move this 4 as before and then hit white from the 7 point by playing that 6 from 7 to 1. Now this looks a little more dangerous. If white enters with a 1, black has a lot of blots exposed. That's pretty bad for him. The merit of this play is that if black gets away with it, he may be able to close his board immediately and keep white trapped on the bar at a time when white has a lot of checkers still trapped in the outfield. The reason that's good is that black will then come home, start to bear his men off, and if white takes a little time coming in, black will be able to win a gammon. This is the play that by far wins the most gammons for black. Both plays have about the same winning chances. If black makes the safe play, or the relatively safe play here, he's got about the same winning chances as he'd have with the other play, but he doesn't win as many gammons with this play because either white will hit this shot, or if white misses and doesn't roll a 6, he'll start moving men into his inner board. Those are men that he'll get in. He won't have to worry about getting them in later. And by being able to keep his army moving, keep the outfield checkers moving, at a point where he eventually does get closed out, he won't have as much freight to move to get into his inner board and avoid a gammon. So this move really takes the pressure off white, whereas the better play of hitting from 7 to 1 keeps the pressure where it belongs, squarely on white. White has to roll an ace, and then pretty soon after that he's got to roll a 6 to get out. And if he doesn't roll an ace to start, he almost certainly gets closed out, and a very good chance of a gammon in that variation. So that was the play that black should have made. Unfortunately, he made the safer play, which is good for winning the game, but it doesn't give him as many gammons. Okay, now white shoots. He needs a 6 to hit, and he gets a 6, 4-2. So his play is completely clear. He takes a checker from here, and he hits the black blot right there on the 16 point. Now both sides have a checker behind a prime. White's checker is behind a full 6-point prime, but it might be a prime that cracks. Black's behind a 5-point prime, but he still has to get in and then try to get to the edge. So now we've transposed into a pretty interesting prime against prime game. Let's see where we go from here. Now, the first thing that happens is very good for black. Black rolls a 5-3. He can't come in on the 3. He can't come in on the 5, so he stays out. And in a priming game, it's not bad to stay out. As long as black can stay on the bar, his 6-point prime here cannot break. He maintains it, so there's no way white can get out. And white, in turn, has to keep moving. So if black simply stays on the bar and rolls big numbers, he's just going to win, because eventually white will move all these men into his home board and his position will break up. For white to win, he has to hope that black actually enters and then starts moving his own prime and breaking it apart. So 5-3 is the best possible roll for black here, aside from something like 2-6, which of course would be very good as well. Now white shoots. White rolls a 6-5, and this is actually a very instructive number. White could make a blunder here, but he doesn't. So let's see the play that white avoids making. A lot of players here would make the following play with a 6-5. They would play the 6 from the 17 to the 23, or from white's 8-point to his 2-point, and they'd play the 5 from the 7-point to the 2-point, filling in the next point in the prime. But the problem with that is that by filling in another point in the board, white makes it harder for black to get this checker in. And as we have seen, for white to win, this checker has to enter at some point, so this position can break up. So although this would be the obvious play in a lot of situations, it's not the right play when you're trapped behind a prime as white is here. Instead, white makes a good play. He plays from this point to this point, the 10-point to the 16-point, and then he picks up this blot with a 5, keeping these 2 points open, hoping that white will enter. Hoping black will enter, and then white has a chance to win the battle of primes. Now black shoots. Black would like to dance. That would be good. Or if he comes in, he'd like to enter with a 2 so that he has some chance of then getting out with a 6. Instead, he throws one of his worst numbers, 1, 3, and of course the 1 is forced. He has to use the 1 to enter. And then the 3 is forced, pretty much forced. He has to play from 6 to 3. Could be worse. 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 6 were all worse numbers, but this is right down there in the bad category. So now white is still behind a 6-point prime, but it's a prime that can't hold up even one more turn. It's going to have to break here pretty soon. Meanwhile, black is behind a 5-point prime, but he's not at the edge, so it's almost like he's behind a 6 prime. The only number that will directly get him out next turn is a 1, 6. And white shoots, and white rolls an okay number, a 5, 3. Lets him keep his prime, which is the main thing. He plays the 5 from 16 to 21, and the 3 from the 16 to the 19, from actually the 9-point to the 6-point, the 9-point to white's 4-point. So he keeps his prime. That means he's still in the ball game, and now it looks like it's black that's going to have to break first. Now black shoots, and he rolls a 4, 2. Not his worst. But unfortunately, he misplays it. He forgets the cardinal rule of priming games, which is that you want to keep your opponent moving so that he can break up his position. And instead, what he does is he hits white from the 7-point. This really, if white now stays out, black's put himself in a terrible situation because he's going to have to close his board, and then he's going to need a 1 immediately followed by a 6 to get out over here. So that's a pretty big mistake. A better play, let's put the position back where it was. A better play was to just clear the 7-point. And even though you've broken your full 6 prime, white still has to get out. He still has to roll a 6, which he might not do. And in fact, if white then rolls a 5 or a couple of rolls without a 6, white could be the one breaking up first. So you want to leave your opponent the chance to keep moving and keep busting his own position. You don't want to put him on the bar where he can't move, and therefore he keeps his block as long as possible. So this is a pretty big mistake for black. Okay, so black has hit white, put white on the bar. White now shoots. He rolls a 3, 2. That's a good number. He can't come in, so he can allow black to keep moving and hopefully breaking up. Now, black rolls a 4, 1. That's a pretty good shot for him, all things considered. The 4 is clearly going to be 7 to 3. No doubt about that. Now, he has choices with the aces, but really there's only one good play here. If he closes his board, then he keeps rolling, keeps moving, and almost certainly breaks his board up from the back next turn. That's not what he wants to do. Instead, the right play, which he makes, is to play 24-23. Now he's hoping that white does not roll an ace hitting, and then he's hoping next turn he rolls a 6, he gets out, and he keeps his prime in position. So it's the best he can do with a pretty good roll under the circumstances, and it might actually make up for the error that he made with his 4-2. Now white shoots, and white rolls a very nice number. He rolls the ace that he needs, so he hits black. Comes in from the bar with the ace, hitting black. And now with the 5, he doesn't want to hit black again from the 7-point because that breaks up his prime a little more. So instead he simply dumps a checker from the 6 to the 1. He doesn't care too much if black enters with a 1 and hits here because then that checker has a hard time getting out. So really it's all about now whose prime breaks up first, and the advantage is switching back and forth every turn. So we've got a pretty exciting game here. Now black shoots. He rolls a 6, 4. He's on the bar. Of course he can't come in with a 4. He can't come in with a 6. So he stays on the bar. That's a little good, a little bad. If he could roll a good number, get in and out, he'd be happy to do that. Staying on the bar may allow white to break up his position, but on the other hand, there's some danger that black will just get closed out and gammoned here. So the game's getting pretty interesting. And white decides he'll make it even more interesting. So he takes the cube, and he sends it over on black's side, and he's redoubling from 2 to 4. So now it's black who has to decide, do I want to play this game out, or should I give it up here and lose 2 points? Well, black decides, and I think correctly, that although he's in trouble, he's got a checker on the bar. This checker could get attacked. It's still not a guaranteed thing that white will ever get this checker out. If white goes 3 or 4 turns without rolling a 6, it'll be white's position that collapses, and black will get the advantage. So realizing that there's a decent chance that it'll take white several turns to roll a 6, and that in those variations black will become a big favorite quickly, he correctly decides to take the cube. So the cube's now at 4 on black's side, and white will be shooting. Okay, white shoots. He really wants a 6 so he can get this checker out, but he rolls a 4-3. Not his worst, not his best. With the 3, he plays from 4 to 1, covering that point. And with the 4, he breaks his bar point. So he doesn't like seeing that go, but on the other hand, black is on the bar, and maybe next turn white can actually close the 2 point on his head. Not white's best shot, but not his worst either. Now it's black's turn. Now in these sorts of positions, black is going to have some very good rolls and some very bad rolls. His best roll is 2-5, which would enter and hit. And really any 2 he'd be happy to see here. 2-1 is a pretty good shot, which enters and hits over here. Instead, he rolls double 5s. He stays on the bar. Of course, that means he keeps his prime here for a while longer. So again, white's going to need a 6. Now white shoots. He needs a 6. He wants a 6. He's got some other good numbers like 5-1, 5-2, 1-1, 2-1. They're all good. They all make the 23 point, but unfortunately he rolls double 3s. And double 3s, he plays it about the only way he can. He switches from his 5 point to his 2 point. So he moves these 2 checkers, puts that other checker up on the bar, and then with his last 2 3s, he goes from his 7 point to his 4 point, his 4 point to his 1 point. So he's got black on the bar. In that sense, he's doing well. All he needs now is that elusive 6 that he hasn't been able to throw yet. Now black shoots. Black needs a 5 to come in, and he gets a 5-2, so that's pretty good. He gets to enter 1 checker with the 5. And then, of course, he can't play the 2 because he still has to get the other checker in from the bar before he can move any place else on the board. But getting 1 checker in is still a good accomplishment. And now it's going to be up to white. Now he really needs that 6 because his position is starting to fall apart. Okay, white shoots, but again, no 6. This time he gets a 5 and a 2. Really only one thing he can do with the roll. With the 5, he's going to move off his 6 point, play from the 6 down to the 1. And with the 2, he'll pick up the other blot on the 6 point, move that to the 4 point. So his board is broken up. Now he's really got to hope that black stays on the bar and he gets a 6 to get out in time. Okay, black shoots. He needs a 5 or a 6 to get in, but he rolls a 2-1. So he stays on the bar, and now it's going to be white's turn to try to get a 6. And now white shoots, and he wants a 6, but he gets the wrong 6. 5-1 doesn't help him because he can't move 5 and he can't move 1. Those points are blocked. So he has to play on this side of the board where he has no 5s left, so he can't move the 5. The only thing he can do is move an ace, and he moves that from his 3 point down to his 2 point. And now it's black's turn. Who's going to get the number first that they need to win the game? And it's black. Black rolls a 6-1. With the 6, he enters on the 19 point. And then with the 1, he's going to try to stop white from getting away by hitting, so that white, instead of just needing to roll a 6, needs to roll a 1 and a 6. So black uses the ace to go from 2 to 1, hits the blot. Now white's got to get in with a 1, then got to get out with a 6. That's a tall order. This could be the end of the game right here unless white rolls an ace. And white shoots. He needs an ace to stay alive. Unfortunately, he rolls a 5-2. The 2 points blocked, the 5 points blocked. White can't move. He stays on the bar. And now it's black's turn. And black has become a huge favorite here now. And he's such a good favorite he doesn't even roll. He just takes the doubling cube and turns it to 8. Puts it on white's side. And now, unfortunately for white, his chances of winning are very, very small. Black can close his 1 point if he rolls any 2 or if he rolls double 6. And even if he doesn't close it, well, that's about 13 of his 36 numbers right there. And of the other 23, white only has about a 30% chance to get in with a 1, and after that he still needs a 30% chance to get out later on with a 6. So it's just too big a problem for white to win here. His winning chances are well under 25%, and he's got to give it up. So that's the end. White drops the cube as it's turned from 4 to 8. He concedes 4 points, and black wins the game. Okay, so that turned into quite an interesting battle. The cube got all the way up to 8 before the game finally ended. Basically, we started out in a mutual holding game, and then we switched to a one-way holding game, and finally we switched back and forth into a priming game, and at the end it just turned into a shootout where each side needed to roll certain numbers to win, and it turned out that in the end black survived the longest and finally pulled it out at the end with a victory. Now, in our next episode, we're going to take a look at some typical doubling positions. We'll look at doubling in the early part of the game, doubling in the late part of the game, how you double in priming positions, doubling in back games, and doubling when you get into a straight race. The doubling cube is the single most important part of the game in terms of determining a winning player. And next time we'll look very carefully at how to use it properly. Now, remember, for online backgammon, try the site Black Chip Poker, which is part of the Merge Network. They accept American players. You can sign up through the My Account page here on DragTheBar. And don't forget to sign up for Rakeback when you join. Until then, this is Bill Roberti signing off for DragTheBar.